Hello, Jeff Disher here again. Today I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin, and because it's such a huge area, I'm going to be just talking about an introduction to it, and also the depths of my own knowledge in this are fairly shallow so far, so this will also kind of give us a talking point that I can actually speak reasonably about. So first of all, what we're going to talk about here, it's going to be hopefully not run long, but there is even a lot to cover, even just as a basic introduction. So first of all, what is Bitcoin? Why would I use it? How does it work? How do I get them, the actual coins themselves? Is this even real or is it a scam? And also some more information for other things you just might want to look into related to this if you're getting deeper into it. So, okay, what is Bitcoin, first of all? What are we actually talking about? Well, Bitcoin's what's called a cryptocurrency. It's essentially a kind of money that's supported by the same kind of mathematics that underlie encryption. So, hence they put the words together, cryptocurrency. It was created in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, this is generally considered a pseudonym. No one knows who this is, even how many people this is. Some assume it might actually be sort of a collection of people who were economists and cryptographers, but generally kind of unknown origin. Really what it is it ends up being an internet-era payment system, kind of like credit card for the internet age, because credit cards don't really work well on the internet. The other thing some people use it as is a speculative financial asset. They just try buying and selling them because the volatility in the price at this point in time is quite high still. So there's a lot of risk reward involved in this for those who are kind of faint of heart. So why would I use it? Well, the most obvious reason, at least what I consider kind of the biggest area where this can go, is in sending money online. This is because there's very low fees. I know any of the transactions I've done with Bitcoin, in Canadian dollar terms, the transaction fees are usually around 6 cents, no matter how big the transaction is. I think it's between 6 and 13, depending on when it was and some of the other details. There's no intermediary in it. This means that you're not having to go through some other company who's going to be determining whether or not you're allowed to send and receive money, or is going to take a fee, just a cut on every transaction, just because they are in between you and them. A company like PayPal, for example. There's nothing like that in the Bitcoin world. It works directly through the network itself, which involves other computers, but they're not a big monolithic company. It's pseudo-anonymous, which is kind of interesting because while it's possible to note that there's a lot of money going in and out of a certain user of Bitcoin, you can't tell who that user is, and there's even ways they can try and kind of hide their identity a little further than that to make it even harder to tell what's going on. This is part of why earlier on this ended up being adopted very quickly by some kind of illicit online markets. But more recently it's spread to some fairly mainstream and other kind of just progressive, technically progressive areas online. So the other reason you might use it is kind of like listed before. You might be using it as a speculative investment. There's high risk reward potential. If you look at the price of Bitcoin over the past few years, it's gone from I think about $10 to over 1,000 and back again. I know around now, I think earlier today I checked it, it's trading around 630 Canadian dollars per Bitcoin. So it's somewhere in the middle of there. And it's been kind of at that point for a while. Most of the volatility has sort of been settling down over time. But there is, of course, there are factors there that can actually sway it quite a bit still. So it does have high risk reward potential for people using it as that kind of investment. And the other reason why you might use it, and this is a bigger issue, people use it in the past, today this has become a bit more specialized, you can use it to sell computational power, because there's sort of a Bitcoin network that actually mediates this system. You can actually sell your computational power of your computer into this. Again, this is a process called mining, called Bitcoin mining. It's not really feasible for you to use a home PC to do this anymore. They now use specialized hardware. Thing called Bitcoin mining rig ASICs, application specific integrated circuits. You tend not to see people do this with their actual PCs anymore. Some of them do, but it's only just for fun because I think it's neat. But that's it. So that's for mining. So how does that actually work? Well, every kind of user within the Bitcoin system they usually have a wallet. Well, they usually just refer to it as a wallet. What a wallet has in it is a collection of what's called addresses. Now, all transactions within actual Bitcoin are always between addresses. So that's where you get your pseudo-anonymity, is that no one can necessarily tell who owns the address. They can just tell how the money is moving through it. And the address itself has a public and private key. Now this is where your cryptography element comes into it. You can, because it has a public key, that's how the system verifies transactions that from the address. But whoever owns the address, they own the private key. This is the part you cannot let anyone see, because if you have the private key for an address, that allows you to use the money in that address, because only you can sign it with the private key, which means no one else can falsify your attempt to use it, but the public key can be used to verify it. So everyone can, when they see you put forward a transaction, they can observe that, oh, okay, that's a correct transaction. It has the expected signature. I don't know how they generated it. I don't have the private key, but I can validate using the public key that it is, in fact, what was expected. Often you'll see these stored as QR codes. This is just because otherwise you're writing down kind of a long string of letters and numbers. So it's one of the, there's many uses for QR codes, but Bitcoin addresses are often where you see this. In fact, you can even print out, if you're concerned about the security of your private key, some people actually print them out on pieces of paper as QR codes and then store them in safes or something like that. So no one can steal it from them unless they get access to that, if that's their only copy of the key. So it's actually kind of neat. There's a peer-to-peer online network. Now what this means is just a bunch of computers sort of connected to each other in a big sort of mesh online. And how this works is that network is actually what issues new coins, and there's a limit to this, but that's how the money creation system works. And that's done in response to performing activities within the network that actually support the ongoing transactions. This is that validation I was talking about with the addresses. That has to be done by many, many computers. And so their reward for doing that verification is that they might be able to get some of these new coins. And these are paid out roughly every 10 minutes. And the rate they're paid out at is slowing down. So yeah, this is responsible for verifying the transactions. In fact, when you make Bitcoin transactions, you can watch as the number of verifications in the network increases. And this protects you from making sure someone isn't trying to double spend the money or something like that. But it's how the system works. Now what this ultimately produces, it's what is called a public ledger. Technically within Bitcoin, that is referred to as the blockchain. And it's because all the transactions are summed up into what's called a block. And all the peers on the network, they race to create the longest, or they race to attach this block with all the transactions in it to the chain. And if they're the first one to produce the longest chain, they win. And that's when they get paid. So what this means is that all the Bitcoin transactions that have ever taken place are actually recorded in the chain. It's many, many gigabytes at this point. You can actually look up online how big the blockchain is, but it's always growing. But it doesn't grow very quickly. It's very kind of cleverly put together. So that means that the way you can tell that no one's double spending, because how do you make sure that they're not paying you and paying someone else the same money? If you have a physical coin, you can tell because, well, it only exists in one person's hand at a time, right? That's just the nature of the universe. But when you do digital things, someone can always copy a file. But this is how it actually makes sure that's not happening. All those transactions, they have to be validated, making sure that they're correct, someone's using the right key, so they're not trying to steal your money. And they also have to make sure that that address has that money. This way you can't double spend. So that's how you know where all the coins are. It's how much money every address has can be computed by analyzing the blockchain. So this is how it works, but it's a public ledger because anyone can look at this. Now again, they don't know who owns those addresses, they just know how much money is associated with each one. And again, by address, I just mean this is just a name. It's just sort of a long string of letters and numbers. It's not your IP address or your email address or anything like that. It's just a way it records a specific kind of grouping of money. So if that makes sense to you, or you're interested in getting more into that, or you're trying to actually use this and that's that's where you're going with this, is how do I get them? Well, these exist somewhere out in the internet. They're not things I can just go get, right? And it really depends on where you are. The easiest way to do this historically has been to use a Bitcoin exchange. Now, this is usually something where it'll be a website where you can say, okay, fine, I'll buy Bitcoins from you, and they say, okay, send, wire some amount of money to us from your bank account. And it takes some amount of time to get there, and then they give you the coins. Now, this is, of course, somewhat risky for a few reasons. First of all, you have to trust them with that money you're sending them. They'll actually give you what you want. Same way as any kind of selling anything online. But also, you have to make sure that you think they know what they're doing, because now they're holding that money for you, at least until you take it out some way. So this is something which has been there's been a bunch of high-profile security breaches in some of these over time. Now, they don't all fail like that. In fact, most of them don't. But it is something which is making people a little wary of that. And also, ideally, you shouldn't really require these things. But again, it's a transition thing. We're not yet past this, so Bitcoin exchanges can be useful for most people. The other way you can do it is mining. Now, again, this is not really something you're going to do today. You'd have to go spend a few $1,000s getting special mining hardware to do it. And then you'd join a mining pool and you'd become part of the network, and you'd get paid for basically having this piece of hardware you'd buy do work for the Bitcoin network. Historically, this is how a lot of people built sort of their initial stashes of Bitcoins, very, very early adopters. But nowadays, it's not really feasible for kind of the average user getting into this to be doing this. The other way, which is the most convenient, if you can find one, is using a Bitcoin ATM. I know there's one of these in downtown Toronto, and it's great. It works exactly like you'd kind of hope it would. It's almost like you can use your Bitcoin address or your Bitcoin wallet, kind of like a bank account. You just put money in, take money out, and it's all stored in Bitcoin online. So it's great. But again, these are still incredibly rare. Over time, we're starting to see them roll out in different cities, but they're not everywhere yet. So if you're in a big city in sort of a developed nation, you're probably going to be able to find one of these. But again, really, really hit and miss whether you will be able to. In time, these will be everywhere, though. So the other thing is this real? A lot of people wonder about, is this some sort of scam that someone's just sitting somewhere selling you this fake stuff and getting rich on it? It's like, well, not really, because there's no center of the network that way. There wouldn't be a person who would be collecting it, because that's not how the network works. It just doesn't make sense. So it really comes down to, okay, does Bitcoin have value? Well, it depends what gives currency a value. Right? If someone's willing to trade it, then yes. But it's not really obvious, because it's not being used all around you, so it's only as useful as someone who wants to accept it. But again, it's kind of like using a foreign currency. Remember, if you go to a different country, say if I go from Canada to Germany or something, and I try and buy something in Canadian dollars, I'm probably not going to be able to. They might give me a really terrible exchange rate, but probably not, because that's not money there. It's money here, so it's because that's how fiat currencies work. So part of the reason why people don't think that Bitcoin's real is because it's not a fiat currency, which means that there's no government-backed central bank that's actually issuing it. So, and this is true. Remember, fiat currencies get their weight partly because the government says that you can pay your taxes in that money, and you have to, and that you have to be legally allowed to pay your debts in that nation using that currency. So this means that minimally someone has to accept it. So this is what gives those currencies power in the real world. Now, on the internet, of course, it's all just sort of up to your interpretation, right? There is no center of the internet. So in this sense, it's just, they're not really easily comparable. They work in totally different ways, and they solve totally different problems. Now, what you could compare it to is something more like a credit card or an online transaction processor, right? Because when you're just online, you're not sending them your local currency at all. You're going to be paying with a credit card, or maybe you're going to be using something like PayPal. Those are the real things that Bitcoin competes against, because it's that transaction medium. That's what you really want. You got to buy things online. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what country they're in. You're not sending them cash. It's going to be credit card, transaction processor or Bitcoin, something like that. So that's really where this is going to come into its own and where we're going to see a lot of value out of Bitcoin. So that's kind of my very, very quick drive-by of kind of getting started and throwing some ideas around that'll kind of give you something to look into if you're going to dig deeper into this. Now, of course, for more information, the most obvious places to look, if you just look online, you'll find tons of places where people are talking about this. The article on Wikipedia is, of course, very good. Wikipedia's articles tend to be very good, and that will also give you a bunch of other good jumping off points, and it gives you a very good high-level description of some of the ideas behind it. Also, there's some other sites that I've kind of found as well very useful going through it. There's blockchain.info. This has lots of transaction tracking and processing. In fact, I've been playing with using some of their interfaces for doing Bitcoin merchant support. It works very well. There's lots of information there. It's a really good site for that. There's Multibit. This is a cross-platform wallet for desktop computers. So if you want to be working with Bitcoin, the first thing you need is a wallet so you can put your Bitcoins into an address somewhere. Multibit is a Java-based desktop application for managing Bitcoin wallets and Bitcoin transactions. It's really, really good. I've been very pleased with it as well. It's the one I've been using for the past couple months. And there's also, this kind of relates to something I mentioned earlier, there's this company bitaccess.ca. They make Bitcoin ATMs. They're the company that made the one in downtown Toronto. It's very good. If anyone's looking into more information relating to the Bitcoin ATMs, you want to put one in somewhere, it would help all of us if you did. BitAccess has some really nice ones. So, but there's a bunch of companies doing this. This is just the one I've seen, the only one I've interacted with. So I hope that was useful as sort of a starting point with what can be done with Bitcoin and sort of some future directions we have there. It is something I'd like to talk about again in other kind of details, but of course it's a huge area of discussion because it involves anything from finance and economics all the way to the technology and cryptography and computer science and network topology into the philosophy of what money means. It's a huge area, and you can basically talk about it just about in any direction you want, and someone will find it interesting. So send me any suggestions if you want me to talk about a specific aspect of it, and I'll put something together based on that. Otherwise, just send me the usual suggestions or questions if you have them relating to this or any talk that you would like me to do, and I'll get around to that. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.